The REBT Advocates, number 15, with Dr. Michael R. Edelstein and Tommy Bateman. Let's get started.
All right, Michael. Today we wanted to talk about a couple of techniques within REBT that we can use to help with emotional disturbance. First one being semantic accuracy, and the second being paradoxical intention. Now, let's not let these terms scare us here. I think our listeners can use these techniques to really help themselves. But first, before we start, what do these two things have to do with REBT to begin with?
Okay, that's a good question, Tommy. And let's start with semantic accuracy. As we've been discussing in these podcasts, one of the main issues that REBT deals with is people disturbing themselves emotionally by thinking in absolute terms, absolutistic terms such as musts and shoulds, supposed tos, have tos. I must do well and get approval. You should treat me better. Life needs to be easier, things like that. So must, should, needs, those are absolutistic terms that generally lead to emotional disturbance. So we teach our clients to question, challenge, and contradict these and to think in terms of preferences rather than demands. So along with this, to help reinforce it, with some clients, I teach them semantic accuracy, which means whenever they hear themselves say, well, I need to get to the plane on time, or I must do X, Y, and Z, or you shouldn't treat me that way. Whenever they use those words, then they retrace their steps and say, what I really meant is I strongly prefer you don't treat me this way, or I would like to get to the plane on time because if I miss it, there will be extreme disadvantages. So that's the semantic accuracy and its connection with REBT. It just helps people think more clearly by changing the words they use. Now, I want to emphasize that just by changing the words in itself normally won't do much because we're going for the deep meanings behind the words, the deep meanings such as if I must do well, that means I'm no good if I don't, or if you should treat me well and you don't, that means you're a louse. And a must and should means for all time, 101% of the time, past, present, and future. So it has deep meanings, but these words, using the right words, could help along the way.
Understood. Now, paradoxical intention, what does that have to do with REBT?
Okay, now with paradoxical intention, it's a technique devised by Viktor Frankl, who was a Viennese psychiatrist around the time of World War II and after. And he came up with this approach. And what it basically means is trying to get the result you're afraid of getting. So one of the examples he gave in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, is he had a client who was an adolescent who had a stutter. And this boy was on the trolley car, and the conductor was coming around taking the tickets, and the boy didn't have a ticket, and he happened to have a severe stutter. And he thought, what am I going to do when the conductor comes to me? And he thought, I know, I'll just stutter very badly like I usually do, and he'll feel sorry for me, and he won't kick me off the trolley. So when the conductor asked him where his ticket is, he tried to stutter, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't stutter. He spoke fluently. So the idea is by trying to get the result you're normally afraid of getting, it shows you show yourself that it's not awful, terrible, and horrible if you get it, because if it was, you obviously wouldn't try to get it. And you see, by doing it, by stuttering, if you're afraid to stutter, that it's not the end of the world. The world goes on, and you don't turn into a rotten person.
And sure enough, you can stand it. It's not awful. You can stand it. This is what you're saying. Yeah.
Exactly, that too. That you see, you did stand it. You can stand it. You didn't turn into a puddle of water or anything like that. So by doing that, then often clients find it helps them allay some of their fears. One more common example is anxiety about public speaking, where someone thinks, I must give a good speech and I must be approved of. So the homework assignment they give themselves for paradoxical intention is to try to say something stupid or try to do something that may not be the greatest thing when you give a speech, such as saying, oh, I forgot what I was going to say, or repeating yourself or things like that. Mm-hmm. So now, you normally wouldn't do this if there were grave consequences, such as if you didn't give a great speech, you'd be fired. So that would not be the time to do it. Mm-hmm. But there are many other cases where it would be good to try that and show yourself it's not the end of the world if your fear came true.
So I think what's one of the big things with this is that an emphasis in REBT is practice, practice, and more practice. And both semantic accuracy it asks of us to continue to practice these new ways of thinking, to inculcate them into our habitual thinking so that we aren't using these demanding words in our daily thinking life. And the paradoxical intention is challenging that major must number 3, that life must be a certain way or else I can't stand it. Challenging that in the first place and giving yourself evidence that you can. But again, that takes practice and intentional action.
That's right. Yes. And getting back to paradoxical intention, another major way people can use it is with secondary disturbance. If they're anxious about feeling anxious, for example, let's get back to the public speaking. Mm-hmm. If you start getting anxious a week before you're scheduled to give the talk because you're afraid you'll get anxious at the talk, then paradoxical intention would be to tell yourself, okay, I'm going to try to be anxious. I'm going to try to shake and sweat. I'm going to try to look like the most anxious person who ever gave a talk. Mm-hmm. So you can use humorous ways and extreme ways to think of it to yourself, and many people find that helpful.
And so are they actually becoming shaking and sweating on the stage and actually experiencing that anxiety, or what's happening to them?
Well, that's a great question, Tommy. And normally what happens to them is the anxiety, just by thinking this and giving themselves that suggestion to be anxious, it sort of cuts through the absoluteness of I must not be anxious, and the anxiety diminishes about being anxious, and then the anxiety diminishes right before the talk about doing poorly on the talk. So I haven't had any clients report to me, it worked. I actually did sweat and shake because they normally don't get to that point.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Michael, this has been very helpful. I hope the listeners take this and move forward and practice themselves.
Okay, thanks for helping me explain this, Tommy. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.